nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishvaram. Itam Shri Radhikanatha Prananatha Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupan Anya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payorasho Muda Kedato Vande Bhagavatani Mananulabam Murdna Nipatyakshito. Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimadrupa Parambojo Dhuli Syam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Vilashati Balashvavara Shirupa Chinta Malasapti Sangsto Durdantamutsvanta Haichurastam Raganugano Bhajana Lasamanasanam Shiradhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Chetasam Me Chittam Satam Marukari Atupada Padme Ya Bhaktir Nikilarta Varga Janani Ya Brahma Sakshat Kriter Anandati Shaya Pradavisaya Jat Sukyat Vimuktir Yaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Pujayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakarya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Yaramya Nikilagha Sangha Shamani Shotratritim Sangata Yaswadhyai Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yadhari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Swabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Maha Prabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again today we will resume our discussion of Padyavali. And we're here in the section on Bhaktas Niṣṭhā. So we'll continue today, beginning with a verse of Sri Madhavendra Puripad, in which he expresses Niṣṭhā in the path of bhakti in contrast to the path of karma. So for those of us who were not raised in Indic culture, or within the Varnashram society, we may not relate to the sense of great reverence, great attachment, great sense of responsibility, and also to what it's like to be in a social atmosphere where the duties of one's Varna and ashram are the principal guiding features of one's life and of one's community and of the way of thinking in one's society. we may not directly relate entirely to the way or what is expressed in the first verse we'll discuss today, which is a very respectful, humble way of expressing bold fixity in the path of bhakti in contrast to the path of karma and observance of varna and ashram duties and so forth. But we can also appreciate the spirit of the statement nonetheless, and also consider the spirit of it in the context of our modern life and situations in which we also choose to adhere to the path of bhakti in contrast to certain forms of conventional norms or expectations that may be present in whatever society or country or whatever we may find ourselves. So, in that way, we will begin. So I'm starting from verse 79, and it should be the first verse in the file. So, next the compile cites an expression that demonstrates full maturity in fixity in bhakti. Sandhyā-vandana bhadram astu bhavato bhoḥ snāna tubhyaṁ namo bho pitaraś tarpaṇa-vidhau nāhaṁ kṣamyatām yatra kvāpi niṣadya yādava-kulottamasya kaṁsa-dviṣaḥ smāram aghaṁ harāmi taralam manye ki manye name. O Sandhyā-vandana, may there be auspiciousness unto you. O bathing, obeisance unto you. O Devas and Forefathers, I am unable to perform oblations. Please pardon me. Sitting somewhere, remembering and remembering the crown of the Yadu dynasty, the enemy of Kaṁsa, I will dispel all ill. That I consider enough. What is the use of anything else to me? So, this is a rich poetic expression. Each statement and address conveys much meaning, so we'll dive into the import of this statement. So first of all, the term Sandhyā-vandana, synonymous with the term Sandhya-upasana, refers to the rites of worship enjoined for daily observance by those following the path of karma at the junctions of the day. So the word sandhi means a joint or a junction, so sandhya refers to a time or to something that lies or exists at the junction. So these points are summarized in Hari Bhakti Vilas, from citations from Vishnu Puran and so on, as follows. O king, after the appropriately performing achaman, a learned person should perform upasana with the sun prior to the sandhya at the end of the day, and conjoined with the nakshatras at the sandhya in the morning. O king, upasthana, meaning upasana, at the sandhyas is prescribed at all times other than those of sutaka, ashocya, agitation, disability, and danger. Sri Sanatana Pad cites the following verse from a Smriti Shastra to clarify the proper timing of the upasana to be performed at the sandhyas. So this might be a little bit of excessive detail, but I'm just including this in here because I've been asked this so many times, and it seems to be not all that well of a documented point as far as when those who chant the Gayatri mantra or those who chant other things according to the timing of the sandhyas, when the actual prescribed window of time is for that. So this is how Sanatana Goswami discusses it. According to rule, one should perform upasana at the morning sandhya with the nakshatras. So what does that mean? During the last muhurta of the night, before sunrise, while the nakshatras are still visible. So it's generally understood that the last two muhurtas, or periods of approximately 48 minutes, before sunrise are called the last two muhurtas of the night, and what is generally thought to be the phenomena in nature associated with the transition between the second to last muhurta and the final muhurta is that the stars or the nakshatras disappear, or they start to fade from that point on. So by saying in the morning with the nakshatras, it means while the nakshatras are still visible before the sun has risen, during that final end of the night or period before the night completely ends. And quote, with the sun at the later Sandhya when the sun is about to set. So by saying about to set, he means during the second half of the last muhurta of the day and the first half of the muhurta of the night. So in other words, a span of a muhurta in which the sunset falls in the middle. So in the morning, the muhurta prior to the sunrise, and in the evening, a figurative muhurta, so to speak, spanning half the one before and half the one after the sunset. Okay, so some excessive detail, but nevertheless, more or less, no harm in at least knowing this point of information, in case it ever is useful. Sri Sanatana Pad also explains in this regard that there is no fault in Bhaktas of Sri Krishna refraining from observing these rites enjoined for the path of karma. So this Sandhu Upasana is a standard feature of the path of karma, or the path of the duties of the twice-born. But for those who have Shraddha and Bhakti, for those who take to the path of Bhakti, it's not compulsory to perform such Sandhu Upasana. So he explains, if rites such as those to be performed at the Sandhyas shall fall away, that is, be no longer observed as a result of attachment to Krishna Bhakti, there is no apprehension of the fault of degradation whatsoever, as is indicated in a statement of Sri Bhagavan in Padma Puran. Quote, if neglect of rites, meaning those prescribed for the various varnas and ashramas, should occur on the part of persons performing action for me, in other words, who are engaging instead in bhakti to me, 3 crores of great rishis perform those rites on their behalf. Also, in the Adi Puran, it is said, rishis devoted to Bhagavan perform those rites on behalf of they who remember my names, having relinquished all those rites. No degradation occurs for a bhakta endowed with intense Shraddha because of their ineligibility for such rites, by virtue of the strength of their Shraddha in the path of bhakti to Sri Bhagavan. So in our discussion of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Shraddha Prakaran, then some time back we covered this point, that eligibility for the path of karma and the path of bhakti are mutually exclusive. In other words, when one has Shraddha in karma, or when one has Shraddha in nothing, then one is obligated to follow the path of karma. In other words, this is the general default thing, and it's ideal that people have as much Shraddha as possible in it. But if someone acquires Shraddha in the path of bhakti, then as they do so, they lose that eligibility for the path of karma. So this conclusion is based on the teaching of Krishna in the Bhagavatam, which we discussed in detail previously. One should perform rites enjoined for those on the path of karma, so long as one shall not become disinterested, in other words, take to the path of Gyan, or Shraddha in hearing and so forth about discussion of me, meaning Shraddha in the path of bhakti, shall not come about. In other words, you follow the path of karma until you become eligible for the path of either Gyan or bhakti. So, why is all this relevant? Because our poet, Madhavendra Puripad, is speaking about Sandhyā-vandana, which is one of the most common rites performed by those on the path of karma. So a bhakta need not perform such rites, and actually ought not perform them, unless, as a footnote, as Chakravarti Pad explains in regard to the definition of Uttama Bhakti, unless there's some social circumstance in which it will be conducive to social cohesion for a bhakta to show some token observance and respect for such activities for the sake of social welfare, without actually having shraddha in them, in other words, without actually thinking that they're duty-bound to do so. But that's an exception, and in today's society, that type of concern is not there, so in effect, it's not applicable. So, considering this, the author of the verse under discussion, on the strength of his shraddha in bhakti to Sri Bhagavan, respectfully declares, O Sandhyā-vandana, may there be auspiciousness unto you. The intent being, may the highest auspiciousness come to you by means of others observing you with adoration. And the suggested sense being, I, however, will no longer continue to observe you in the future. So in other words, he's being very gentle and respectful in saying goodbye or in ending this relationship and saying that, I wish you all the best. I hope that all auspiciousness comes to you by virtue of all the people who follow you and adore you. I hope it's all wonderful for you, but I will no longer be following you at all. So the commentator also offers another interpretation, wherein the phrase Sandhyā-vandana is taken to refer to rites beginning with those performed at Sandhya, and thus refer to all the daily activities of members of the varnas, various varnas and ashramas. That is, all the daily activities enjoined for those following the path of karma. So you could take Sandhyā-vandana as simply Sandhyā-vandana, or he's saying you could also take it as a token indicator of everything on the path of karma. So with this sense in mind, he portrays as follows an address of all these rites by someone who previously, observed them, but had not, it should be has now acquired shraddha in bhakti, and is thus relinquishing all further observance of them. So if it's such that someone was following that path, they acquired Mahat Sangha, by the result of the sanskar produced by Mahat Sangha, they acquired shraddha in bhakti, then they now need to, and when there is shraddha, there will be sharanagati. When there is shraddha, there will be correspondent behavior. So now the effect of that shraddha will produce this withdrawal from engagement in the active or in the observance of the duties on the path of karma. So putting that shraddha now manifesting that action of withdrawal from the path of karma, then the person is politely addressing, so to speak, the activities, the duties that he had as follows. Saying, may I attain auspiciousness from you? That is, please do not be angry with me as a result of my not observing you, and rather, please graciously engage me in steady performance of worship of Sri Krishna. Meaning, please bless me so that I shall have the steadiness that I previously maintained in daily observing you in the daily worship of Sri Krishna that I will be exclusively engaged in from now on. So the way the verse is written, it says, Sandhyā-vandana bhadram astu bhavata. So bhavataha can mean either from or for, according to the way you interpret the declension or the case of the declension. So one way, the first interpretation, is taking it for. In other words, I wish you the best. And in the other way, he's saying, I wish from you to receive auspiciousness. In other words, I've dutifully followed you for a long time. And lastly, all I ask is this, please give me your blessings to now do Krishna Bhakti. Let me now be blessed by you to show the constancy that I should to you, to my practice of Bhakti. So both are grammatically possible, both are appreciable, they both show the fixity and bhakti of the bhakta, as well as the respectfulness and humility of the bhakta. So both are mentioned. Then we get a similar pattern throughout the rest of the verse. So since bathing is compulsory prior to the observance of Sandhyā-vandana and other rites, the author next says, "O bathing, obeisance unto you." The implication being, please do not be angry at me because I am now unable to perform you any longer. So this doesn't mean that now Vaishnavas don't bathe or that he's never going to bathe again, but he's speaking of bathing as part of or in the context of those rites related to the path of karma. So in the same spirit, the author then addresses the devas led by Brahma and the forefathers, such as the Agni-Shattvatas. Quote, "O devas and forefathers, I am unable to perform oblations for you any longer. Please pardon me." The implication being, I am unable, to offer customary oblations for your satisfaction any longer, because of the absence of any scope for a sadhaka like me, now on the path of bhakti, to perform acts other than those of bhakti sadhana. Please pardon me and let no transgression for non-performance of you befall me. So, simply put, he's politely taking leave and withdrawing from the activities associated with the karma marg as he's dedicating himself to the bhakti marg. After the author thus figuratively honors and respectfully begs the pardon of the daily rites enjoined for those on the path of karma, it is as though these rites reply to the author, "Well, O sadhu, we are pleased by your worship of Bhagavan. We do not take offense at your behavior. But what can we do so that others who are not qualified with Shraddha like you to relinquish all duties on the path of karma do not errantly abandon those duties as a result of observing and misunderstanding your relinquishment of them?" So this is another consideration. In other words, we understand what you're doing, we support it, we value it, but other people are not going to understand. They're going to think that you're at fault for neglecting us, and they may also think, well, he doesn't do it, so why should we? And they may also neglect to observe us when it's actually necessary for them to do so. So how can this be managed? That you can do what is right for you, but it doesn't create some untoward ripple in society, so to speak. So, as if these personified rites are making this appeal to the Vaishnava, then he replies, to assure the daily rites on the path of karma that his conduct would not lead to disorder in society, the author says, sitting somewhere, yatra kvāpi niṣadya. That is, he assures them that he will go into seclusion in a place where no one knows his identity, and thus no one will know that he is a twice-born who earlier had the duty of observing these rites, yet now has relinquished the path of karma on the strength of his shraddha in the path of bhakti, and thus no longer observes them. In other words, don't worry about me being a bad example for people. No one's even going to see me. I'm going to live in a reclusive life, off in the outside of the spotlight of society. So no worries about this. Don't worry that people are going to neglect you. The implication of the author then saying, remembering and remembering the crown of the Yadu dynasty, the enemy of Kaṁsa, I will dispel all ill. Yādava-kulottamasya kaṁsa-dviṣaḥ smāraṁ aghaṁ harāmi, is that all sin or all samsaric suffering that he would incur as a result of neglecting to perform those duties on the path of karma will be dispelled by virtue of his absorption in the practice of bhakti, and specifically the practice of remembering Sri Bhagavan. Since absorbing himself in remembrance of Sri Bhagavan, since by absorbing himself in remembrance of Sri Bhagavan, he is fulfilling the fundamental aim of all the injunctions and prohibitions given throughout all the Shastras. since it is said in the Vishnu Puran, quote, Smartabhya satatam Vishnor vismartabhya najatu chit. Vishnu is to be remembered continuously and is never to be forgotten. All injunctions and prohibitions should be servants of these two principles. So he's saying, I'm doing what is the ultimate purpose or the ultimate action that all the other injunctions and practices are meant to lead one to. So I'm not worried about any ill consequences coming to my actions or that there will be any lingering problem. I'm right on point with the ultimate intent. Thus, the author says, that I consider enough. Tadalam manye. Meaning, the auspiciousness produced by continuous remembrance of Sri Bhagavan is more than enough for me. As is evidenced in Srimad Bhagavatam directly, in contrast to observance of the duties enjoined for the path of karma. Quote, great endeavor in regard to the conduct of the varnas and ashramas, austerity, learning, and so on, is only for, that is, culminates only in wealth and fame. By hearing, honoring, and so forth, narrations of his qualities, however, non-forgetfulness of Sridhar's lotus feet comes about. Non-forgetfulness of Krishna's lotus feet dispels inauspiciousness and produces equanimity, purity of mind, bhakti to the Supreme Self, and knowledge accompanied by realization and non-attachment. So, if I busy myself with all the duties on the path of karma, what do I get? I get wealth, I get fame, I get a pleasurable, conventional, worldly life. But by engaging in constant remembrance of Bhagavan, then I get freed from all sin, I get purity of mind, I get peace of mind, and I get bhakti along with non-attachment and divine experience, perception of Bhagavan. So this I consider enough. I'll be purified of all sin, I won't face any ill consequences, and I'll achieve something far better. The author thus concludes by saying, what is the use of anything else for me? The implication being, there is nothing for me to gain by means of those other activities. And the suggested sense being that the author feels no further necessity or desire to observe the duties enjoined for those on the path of karma, or to engage in any other conventional worldly activities, like meeting with friends and relatives. The author rather wishes only to be absorbed in remembrance of Sri Bhagavan in seclusion, as is evidenced in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So because this verse we know to be by Madhavendra Puri, then we also can consider how his character is described. So there's a nice couple of payars here. Purira prema parakashta koroho vichar, alokik prem chitte lage chamatkar, parama virakta moni sarvatra udasin, gramya varta bhoye dvitiya sangahin. This is especially this last line is a famous statement. So, deliberate on the excellence of Puri's prem. Such otherworldly prem strikes the heart with wonder. He was completely detached, silent, indifferent to everything, and without the company of a second, meaning any companion, for fear of village talk. So in other words, he doesn't want to be distracted from this remembrance. Here in this verse that he's writing, he's saying, yatra kvāpi niṣadya. I'll just sit somewhere, means not in the middle of the village, not near the villagers, but off on my own, away from all of that, I will absorb myself in always remembering Bhagavan. So, detached, silent, without the company of a second for fear of village talk. So these are the outward symptoms of his prem. This is the intent of the Charitamrita statement. Just deliberate on his prem. So it's not that if you just walk out of the village and become silent that you have prema, or that those things prove that one has prema, not like that. But in the case of Madhavendra Puri, where it's known that he had profound prema, then these can be from the beginning understood to be expressions of that prema and appreciated as such, as indicative of its intensity. So I just thought that this statement ties in so well with the verse that he writes here, because here he in first person is saying, I give my respects to everything else. Now I'm going to sit off alone and I don't need anything else. I consider this is enough for me. So, it conveys something of his spirit and how what he's saying here. I've given a general explanation of it based on, Shraddha and Niṣṭhā, but it can also be understood to be, even further in light of this verse as an expression of his prema. And also appreciable about the verse is that when someone lets go of those duties that they had in the path of karma, it's not that they do so in an arrogant manner or in a, now I'm superior, now I'm better, these things are nothing or something, but respectfully, attentively, caringly, they, withdraw. So this also shows something of the humility, respectfulness of a Vaishnava. So that's what I have on that verse. And then in the critical edition, in some sources you can find of the Padyavali, there's another verse that falls between the next verse that's found in all the editions. So I've gone ahead, and the commentator also comments on this quote-unquote extra verse. So this verse must have also been present in the source that the commentator had. So I've also included here this quote-unquote additional verse, but I haven't put it in the mool because I've decided to just directly match the critical edition all the way through, because then I don't have to mark variants or make so many comments. I can just say all considerations of the mool. You can just go look up and see how the critical edition has explained them all. So it's just most efficient for me to just outsource all of that work, especially because it's already been done. So that's why I haven't included it as part of the main count, but just left it here in the commentary. So this next verse is as follows. Snānam mlānam abhut kriya na chakriya Sandhyā-vandana bhavat Veda kedam avappa shastra patali Samputitanta sputa Dharmo marmohato hyadharma niṣadya Praya kṣayam praptavan Chittam chumbati yādavendra charana Bhojhe mamar harnisham. So he says, bathing has become dirty. An interesting remark. We'll explain. It's not a mistake. Bathing has become dirty, and duties not duties. Sandhya has become unproductive. The Veda has met with dejection. The multitude of other shastras have become covered over, manifest only within. Dharma has become vitally wounded, and still the aggregate of all adharma has reached thorough diminution, since day and night my heart kisses the lotus feet of the Yadava's prince. So we'll look at these points. So when he says, quote, bathing has become dirty, he has said this because of the author no longer performing it daily in accord with the rules enjoined for those on the path of karma. So the implication is when you leave something alone and you don't do it on a daily basis, it gets dusty, it gets dirty. So he's saying, I'm no longer looking after this thing called bathing, so it's left aside, it's now become dirty. And duties not duties is said for the same reason. The author no longer observes the duties enjoined for those on the path of karma daily, because such duties are not the duties of one on the path of bhakti. Quote, Sandhya has become unproductive. And there's some play here on words if you look at it. Sandhya cha bandhya bhavat. So he's rhyming Sandhya and bandhya. So bandhya is also a word used for a barren woman, or a woman who's unable to produce children. So he's saying Sandhya is as if become barren or unproductive. So why is that? Because it is unable to produce the result of performing it, since it is no longer being performed. In other words, I'm not observing it in any way, so it's not able to produce anything. The Veda has met with dejection is said to convey that the path of karma is figuratively dejected, or, in the variant commented on by the commentator, quote, soiled, I should bracket that, after being disregarded by those with fixity in bhakti. The multitude of other shastras have become covered over, manifest only within, means the shastras that teach the regulations, rites, and so forth for the path of karma only remain in the author's mind as a result of their having been memorized by rote in early life, but now no longer manifest in action in the form of fire sacrifices, and so forth. So in other words, these shastras, we used to speak them every day. We used to recite all these different mantras. We used to recite all these other prayers in the course of performing, fire sacrifices, in the course of performing Sandhyā-vandana, etc. But now I'm not doing any of those rites, so now they're only quote-unquote within, or they're covered over. It means, I still remember them because, traditionally, especially brahmanas would memorize large sections of texts in their youth, while in Gurukul, in a very methodical, systematized way, such that they would become deeply ingrained. So he's saying, they're still there, but they never come out. They're covered over. They're just inside. Dharma has become vitally wounded is said because Dharma in the form... Excuse me. That should be in. Is said because Dharma in the form of karma yoga has disappeared from the author's life as a result of its not being practiced, since the author now engages exclusively in bhakti. Still, the aggregate of adharma has reached thorough diminution, is said to indicate that despite the author neglecting all of the aforementioned aspects of the path of karma, he has not only not incurred any sin, that is adharma, for doing so, but rather he has also become purified of all his other residual adharma. So normally there's so much fear, if we don't follow these duties on the path of karma, we'll incur sin. And now he's saying he's not doing the duties, and not only does he not have any sin, but even the other sin he had from before that, or in a past life, that's also gone. How is that? The author also declares the reason. Since day and night my heart kisses the lotus feet of the Yadava's prince. Which is a figurative way of saying that he remembers Krishna lovingly. That is, since the author now constantly remains engaged in bhakti, that is, various forms of adoration of Sri Bhagavan's lotus feet. The implication being that the author has no need to observe any of the duties incumbent upon those following the path of karma, and is purified of all sin caused by the neglect of the path of karma, and all sin of all other types by virtue of absorption in bhakti. So, in addition to this verse being not found in all editions, also the version of it in the critical edition is also different than the version that the commentator commented on. So I've included also the commentator's version, which doesn't mention kissing, but it mentions thinking instead, and it doesn't mention the aggregate of all adharma, or sin. It rather mentions the all aggregate of dharma. So those are the two distinctions. So rather than saying I'm free from all sin by my mind kissing Bhagavan's feet, rather he's saying that all dharmas have reached diminution by my observance or my constant thought of Bhagavan. So what the import in that case is as follows. The commentator takes it that, quote, the aggregate of dharmas has reached thorough diminution, refers to acts of karma and occurs because they become unable to cause the hardships they are meant to administer upon those who perform them when they are neglected. So in other words, the effect of these duties upon me has diminished because I'm no longer subject to them, is essentially what he means. Lastly, it is as though someone asks the author, when this is your condition, then what sort of thought do you have about it? The author replies, day and night my thinking enters fully into the lotus feet of the Yadava's prince. The commentator takes it that, quote, thinking, or chinta, which can also convey a sense of worry or concern, is in this case refers to meditation generated by an absence of what is desired and the incurrence of what is not desired. So worry, when do you worry? When you don't have something you need, or you inquire something that you don't want, or that's detrimental. These are the two typical cases when you get worried or you start to think or, meditate on something. So generally, quote unquote, worry or chinta would be considered something negative. So if he's saying that now my chinta or my thinking is entering into Bhagavan's feet, then that might sound a little bit odd. So the commentator is resolving it like this and saying, yes, he's worrying about something he doesn't have, and he's thinking about something else that he has that he doesn't want, as follows. That such meditation entering unwaveringly into the lotus feet of the Yadava's prince indicates that the author, having utterly neglected the path of karma, is now completely absorbed in thought of how to attain Sri Krishna's lotus feet and overcome whatever obstacles lie in the way of that. So there can be, under the influence of rajas, the mind can have a tendency to compulsively plan, to compulsively think, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to get this? How am I going to get rid of that? I should do this tomorrow. I should do this next year. I should this, I should that. There can be what you call big shape, or, this pressing or projecting of the mind out into all these different things when the force of rajas is highly active. So chinta is, you could say, the mind in a rajasic state. But in the case of a bhakta, that rajasicness or that worry or that concern about how to get rid of what is unwanted and to get what is wanted is all one pointed upon Bhagavan and upon bhakti, and therefore is a glorious thing and a highly spiritually beneficial, auspicious thing. So in that way, he explains the point. So in summary, he's saying that I've neglected my duties, the Sandhyā-vandana, all the shastras, all the rituals, etc., all the dharmas that I used to follow, and there's no sin in that for me, and rather my heart is as though kissing the feet of Krishna, or my mind is as though constantly thinking of how I will reach him instead. So a similar verse in the exact same theme, expressing Niṣṭhā. This is the prakaran on Niṣṭhā. So the bhakta is expressing Niṣṭhā, expressing fixity in bhakti by, negation of fixity in the path of karma. All right, so I think we've got time for one more. Next, the compiler cites a verse that depicts the fixity of a bhakta who is indifferent towards everything apart from bhakti to Sri Bhagavan. So now not specifically dealing with the contrast between the bhakti marg and the karma marg, but more broadly. Devakī-tanaya-sevakībhavan yo bhavani sabhavani kim tata utpate kochana sat-pathe'pi manasam vrajatu daiva-deśitam. Upon becoming a servant of the son of Devakī, whomever I must become, that I must become. What of it? Sometimes down a bad road, or alternately down a good road, let the mind go, as directed by destiny. What of it? So this is a little bit peculiar expression. Oftentimes we hear bhaktas praying, let my mind be fixed on you, let me always think of you, let me always chant your name, things like this. But now he's saying, wherever my mind goes according to my destiny, meaning my past karma, then let it go there. So this might seem antithetical, right? There's that famous verse in the Mukunda Mala Stotram where Maharaj Kulashekar famously says, Bhave bhave hridaya bhavane bhavayam bhavantam, with rich alliteration. Bhave bhave hridaya bhavane bhavayam bhavantam. That in birth after birth, in the temple of my heart, let me only contemplate you, or let me only pray over you. So now here this bhakta is saying, my mind might go in a good way, my mind might go in a bad way, let it go, whatever my karma says. So almost the opposite of the typical prayer. So how is this also an expression of Niṣṭhā? In the previous verse also, Madhavendra Puri is saying, remembering always, remembering and remembering Krishna, I will purify myself. And now this bhakta is not saying, remembering and remembering, he's saying, yeah, wherever my mind goes, let it be. So, peculiar, therefore. So let's see how we can understand this to also be another facet of Niṣṭhā in Bhagavan. In the author's statement, quote, upon becoming a servant of the son of Devakī, whoever I must become, that I must become, the intent is as follows. Quote, previously, I was not a servant of the son of Devakī. Now, having become his servant, whomever I must become, that is, whatever role I have to play for the sake of his service, be it regarded as lowly or exalted, that I must become. I am ready and willing to accept that, whatever it may be in this life or the next. What of it? That is, what difference does it make? His service is my one and only aim in this life and in eternity. And thus, it makes no difference to me exactly how it is that I am called to perform that service, since that service, in any and all of the forms he is pleased for it to assume, is my cherished object and attainment in and of itself, and I neither gain nor lose anything by taking on whatever roles I am called to play in the execution of it. So this is a significant point. In other words, if we say, that I just want to be your servant, then whatever that calls of you, then that's what you wanted. And whether at any given moment or any given stage that was quote unquote fun or not fun or easy or hard, all such considerations become secondary or peripheral. And one wouldn't want to not be in such a situation, even if it were unpleasant or challenging or not a cup of tea, so to speak, because if that's what's actually required to serve and one's desire is to serve, then that's actually what one wants, even though there may be some degree of displeasure in it. So this is one way we can say, like, the test of idealism or the test of, greatness, even in the worldly sense or in the spiritual sense, when people can find an ultimate sense of meaning and an ultimate sense of satisfaction, even in something that contains a relatively high degree of content of things that are unpleasant. This is more or less virtue, or this is more or less something special. Whether it's, freedom fighters or martyrs or persons who, excelled greatly in some field, whatever the case may be, to do anything more or less great, you have to have a certain tolerance for difficulty or challenge or austerity or tediousness or danger or whatever. And it's the ability to have such a strong ambition to experience or to attain the good aspect of it, that you're ready to welcome and integrate the turbulence along the way. That is what enables you to succeed, so to speak. And the champion athletes, everyone thinks, so I want to be a champion athlete, but then try doing their workout program for a week. You'll be exhausted, you can't do it. So, many of the things that people want, they don't get them, not because they can't, but because they don't actually want to, quote unquote, pay the price and experience all the difficulty that goes along with attaining that greatness or that satisfaction that's embedded in it. So, similarly, to have the ideal to be a servant of Bhagavan or to have bhakti for Bhagavan is to say, I'm ready for wherever that takes me. I'm ready for whatever road that leads me down. And therefore, if someone truly has relish and taste for that, then even if there's some discomfort or some difficulties along the way, not only does that not sway the person, but that can actually ornament and enrich the experience. Just as, even in ordinary life, if someone, has trying to do a friend a favor or trying to give a gift to a loved one and then encounters some obstacle in the course of doing so, and then overcomes that obstacle, then the recipient is even more pleased by the act, and then the person feels even more pleasure by having produced that greater pleasure in the other by virtue of having undergone the difficulty. So the difficulty and the displeasure that was encountered in the way actually results in an intensification or an increase in the ultimate pleasure that was felt. And then you can scale that up and say, so what if you had to go extreme difficulty to do this? Then some might say, no, I don't want to go through the extreme difficulty. But the other person might say, that's exactly what I want. Because as great as the difficulty is, that much even greater will be the ultimate thrill or the ultimate satisfaction in the heart that will come from performing such a service or making such an offering that called upon one to undergo even such difficulty. And, there's so many instances throughout the Puranas and the other Shastras of Bhagavan expressing so much satisfaction with some bhakta who went through such and such challenges or difficulties in order to render particular services to him or fulfill certain commitments to him or things like this. So, today we're talking about Madhavendra Puri, right? He was there in Vrindavan. He had received the manifestation of Gopal. Everything was great. And then Bhagavan says, I'm hot. Bring me Chandan. Go walk across India, walk through all this infested territory with all these thugs and dangers, and go in the middle of the summer in the hottest time, and then haul back a bunch of, wood for me. So, ouch, that's a big austerity. That's a dangerous, tall task. But Madhavendra Puri was ready for that. Madhavendra Puri signed up for that. And then, how pleased was Bhagavan with the readiness of Madhavendra Puri to perform such service. Then he fed him kheer and, gave him darshan and, showed such sweet and affectionate reciprocation with Madhavendra Puri. So Madhavendra Puri rose to that great difficulty and ultimately pleased Bhagavan all the more, and I'm sure felt all the more wonderful about it all. So anyway, sorry to belabor the point, but this first half of the verse, when he's saying, whatever I have to become, that I must become. If really I'm your servant, then I'm ready for wherever that leads me, whatever it takes. So now, that part is more or less understandable, or it's not maybe a new idea or something we don't hear elsewhere, but what's peculiar is in the second half of the verse. So that will explain. In the second statement, quote, sometimes down a bad road, or ultimately down a good road, let the mind go as directed by destiny. The author firmly conveys, if my mind, which is subject to the dictates of my past karma, sometimes goes down a bad road, that is, cognizes unpleasant or inauspicious thoughts, or sometimes goes down a good road, that is, cognizes pleasant or auspicious thoughts, let it do so. What of it? That is, what difference does that make either? All such thoughts arise in the mind from time to time as reactions to my past actions, and because my life is sold to Sri Krishna, I stand neither to lose nor to gain by enduring those reactions, since he will surely protect and provide for me whatsoever is required for the sake of remaining engaged in bhakti to him. So in other words, one infers that I'm in the care of Krishna, I've given myself over to him, and if he, in his wisdom, seeing me in his care, has it that I undergo my past karma, I live out the consequences of such and such samskaras and undergo thought A, thought B, thought C, thought D, thought Z, thought nth degree, then so what? In other words, he's not identifying with all of those thoughts. He's not identifying with all those samskaras. He's not saying, this is me and I'll never get out of them and all of this. He's seeing, I'm in the shelter of Krishna. I'm under the care of Krishna. I'm not these thoughts. I'm not, even though they might be sometimes unfavorable, I don't see them as something that can actually overpower me or undo me. What are some residual samskars? What are some past karma in comparison to my Krishna? So in this sense, he means that you could take it along the lines of what's said in the famous Tattenu Kampam Susamikshano Bunjana Kritvatma Evam Vipakam, where he's saying that I will look to receive your grace and I'll endure all the consequences of my past actions. So sometimes past actions come in the form of, general life events, but for the most part, the constant stream of our past karma is coming in the form of the thoughts that we live with immediately, moment to moment in our life. So he's saying that those also I have to endure, so why should I be all that concerned about it? If, due to my past actions, due to the samskars, vasanas that are in my psyche, the mind goes like this, the mind goes like that. Okay. In other words, he's not saying that he doesn't want to remember Bhagavan or he doesn't seek to absorb the mind in Bhagavan. Obviously he does, but when obstacles to that arise, when his psyche is, acts as it does, the way it's been programmed, which is machine-like, then he's not also excessively disturbed by that, or he's also not identifying with that entirely and saying, let it so happen, let it go on. I don't see that it can ultimately take me off the path. I don't see that it can get me, or that I gain something from doing this. I just live and see to the grace of Krishna, confident in his protection, confident in what he provides, and with conviction in, the steady engagement in bhakti. Later will come in discussion this other verse in the 11th canto, where, what is it? Abhi Padyamanopi mod bhakta vishayir anabhibhuyate, I believe is how it goes, where Krishna says that my bhakta, is generally not overcome by material things, material thoughts. Even when they experience or they undergo troubles or obstacles because of them. And by virtue of their bhakti, they ultimately overcome them. So there's some very nice commentary on that verse, and we'll get to that in later discussions. I won't go into it now. But we can contextualize this statement in that regard. So since degraded thoughts have no serviceability to bhakti, and rather can pose a detriment to it, I'm giving now a balancing point. The author's intent is not literally that he does not care if such thoughts arise in his mind, but rather that out of humility he confesses that such thoughts do arise at times, and that he is calmly and humbly confident that he will not be thwarted from the path of bhakti by them, and rather gradually will overcome them on the strength of the protection provided by Sri Krishna and the path of bhakti. So this is the sense. So I'll conclude here, and if anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or any other type of feedback, they're welcome to share.
Pranam, how are you?
Pranam.
How are you? So I joined later, so I'm not sure if I missed something that I'll be asking about. Did you give a definition of what's Niṣṭhā actually? Or if you didn't, would you be able to frame it based on Goswami's Grantha?
Here in the context of Padyavali, we can consider it a general adherence to bhakti. There's a place later on here where the commentator interprets it to be equivalent to the Niṣṭhā that's mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is said to quote-unquote come after anartha nivritti. And we know from Chakravarti Pad's commentaries that it's not literally that Niṣṭhā starts when 100% of one's anarthas are annihilated. Rather, certain grades of anarthas are retained until the attainment of bhav and prem and so on. But that when there's a significant primary removal of anarthas, then one is said to be in a state of Niṣṭhā. But ultimately what that alludes to is a grayscale, or a gradual shift of shraddha maturing or intensifying into Niṣṭhā. And sadhusanga, bhajana kriya, and the opposite, the nivritti of anarthas, these things are these three elements are like the interplay by which that intensification or that fixity matures. So we can, in a sense, take the Niṣṭhā that's spoken of here in the Padyavali as equivalent to that, but it doesn't necessarily map exactly to that, because some of these statements can also be seen as expressions of bhaktas at a higher stage as well. Like, for example, today we had this verse of Madhavendra Puri. It's not that he's a bhakta at the stage of Niṣṭhā and what he's saying can't also be considered an expression of prem. It also can. So in that sense, to classify what he's saying in this section on Niṣṭhā doesn't mean that it's Niṣṭhā in a lesser sense, but that it conveys actually a general idea of Niṣṭhā, of simply fixity or focus exclusively on Bhagavan without the pursuit of an object or an anartha other than Bhagavan. So in that way, also some of these statements could be interpreted from a more general view, where maybe someone still does have anarthas, but some of these expressions of Niṣṭhā can also be considered equivalent to them or applicable for them, such as the first one that we discussed, the verse of Mahaprabhu, that Mahaprabhu expressed, Nāhaṁ vipro nacha narapatir. This is something that many Vaishnavas also use in the course of their sadhana as not only a state of realization, but a prayer and a practice. As we explained, this is a way of practicing the anga of bhakti known as dasya. And is certainly considered something applicable to someone who is not at, quote unquote, the official stage of Niṣṭhā and still has anartas. This is something that's, widely considered applicable even for a person at a lower stage. So, considering both of those sides, that some of the statements in this prakaran can be referring to bhaktas who are not at the stage of Niṣṭhā, some of these statements can also be perceived as expressions of something beyond what is technically called the stage of Niṣṭhā. The mention of the word Niṣṭhā here, we can take in a looser sense than the exclusive scope that it's given in the Sindhu, to refer to, fixity in Bhagavan, fixity in bhakti as one's principal object, or an expression of what you might call in Sanatana Goswami's language, aikantikata, or one-pointedness. Sanatana Goswami in Hari Bhakti Vilas, when he analyzes the characteristics of Vaishnavas, he puts one-pointedness as the central most thread of all characteristics, that their principal focus, their aim is Bhagavan, is bhakti. This is what really makes a Vaishnava, this Niṣṭhā, or this fixity, this oneness of aim. So we can take it like that, I think.
So it's kind of combination of different, I would say, understandings. But primarily, Niṣṭhā would be, like you said just now, it's a fixity on Bhagavan. But also, it also means that somebody is completely convinced that that's the path I am, that's my default path. I will never see myself being on other paths or objective that I'm going somewhere else. Despite of whatever happens to me, I may be fallen, maybe imperfect. Things may happen in my life, but it doesn't. So what? I don't care about these things because those are external things. My internal objective is to obtain service to Bhagavan, Nitya Seva. But considering oneself in a transitory state to the objective, meaning that it's considering oneself imperfect despite of being completely fixed on the path. There's this kind of contemplation comes to my mind when I think of Niṣṭhā, because sometimes I'm contrasting this to often heard definition or statement about Niṣṭhā is one who is so regimented, go by the clock, by the numbers, it goes like, understand, it's so strict in his own behavior that this is actually an expression of Niṣṭhā, which is not incorrect to say, but it's that this fixity comes from this conviction in the heart. So if there is the fixity, if external fixity is not there, still the conviction in the heart is not affected. Can we contemplate that way?
Certainly. Chakravarti Pad gives some description like that in Madhurya Kadambani of how someone in the stage of Niṣṭhā will be, never slacken in their observance of whatever standards of practice they do and so forth. And that's true. That's great. But there can be, I think what you're pointing out is that when Chakravarti Pad or other places describe Niṣṭhā like that, they're talking about that when it's an outcome of the inner Shraddha and an inner sense of attachment, not when it's merely a practice of, succeeding in doing a certain daily routine with a certain degree of strictness. And that it is possible for people to maintain a high performance daily set of quotas of certain practices and so on, without necessarily having the other elements of what really constitutes Niṣṭhā. And so you don't necessarily know, just by looking at some person, where they're at, so to speak. Not that we even need to know. We can happily respect everyone for whoever they are, wherever they're at. But, that when these statements are made, there is a scope for potentially going in the wrong sense with them, where one aspires for and values only the external expression without understanding the inner content of it. I think perhaps that's the thread that you're running with, right?
Yes, because my understanding, can we dare to say that Niṣṭhā is the internal fixity of fate? Not that may express itself, or surely it will express itself in variegated of ways externally, but that internal fixity is the primary drive or state of consciousness in the platform of Niṣṭhā.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the implication of it being mentioned after anartha nivritti is that for the most part, there won't be any external slackening or contrariety in their behavior, because such contrarieties arise from anarthas and the person is largely free from anarthas. So that's when the internal thing has intensified to the point where it's bringing into more or less full or tight congruence the external expression that one makes. In other words, the condition of one's mind, the state of one's ideals, and one's actions are coming closely into alignment.
Yet, because of lack of completeness in rati, there must be some. It says that unless someone retains rati, there is always chances of fall down or committing offense, or there's a risk on the path of bhakti, on sadhana, until one attains part of rati. So, would that also include stage of Niṣṭhā, that someone is fixed, but when it happens, whatever happened.
Certainly. I mean, according to the Sindhu, there's a potential for even bhav or rati to be lost if aparad occurs. It's only considered at the stage of prem that one is become such, the psyche has become so intensely pervaded by the higher Shakti that there's no scope for any aparad being committed.
Okay. Thanks.
So I'm certainly nowhere near there, and certainly not only potentially, committing offense, but actually committing offenses, and praying to Vaishnavas and the world for their forgiveness, and, aspiring to have the Niṣṭhā that's described in these verses, and nevertheless inspired to hear such rich poetic expressions of that wealth of heart that's found in these Vaishnavas, which can inspire us to try to more and more bring our ideals and our thoughts and our behavior all into alignment and a beautiful expression of bhakti.
When Bhakta prays to, I'll call it, repents, because repentance is also part of psychology of devotion, right? So, would you be able to just place? Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, because my interface changed. I don't know why. Anyway, so is it possible that how we can place repentance in a scale of all these progressive stages? Do you have a contemplation or a reference to share? Because I'm just simply curious. Because part of sincere progress is recognizing one's own mistakes and repent for mistakes, basically.
Absolutely.
Right. So where's the repentancy? It's a part of Niṣṭhā. It's part of anartha nivritti, or would you be able to just dive into this, or?
Well, One place we often hear it discussed is this couple of verses in the 11th canto, Jatto Shraddhamot Kotasu Nirvina Sarvakarmasu Veda Dugatmakan Kaman Parityagi Panishwara Tato Bhajetamam Pritya Shraddhalur Drida Niṣṭhāya Jushamanaśchatam Kaman Duko Darkangscha Garhayan, where the person has Shraddha, they're indifferent to karma, they know that not doing bhakti, doing these other things only causes suffering, and still they can't give it up. So Krishna says, worship me with faith, with conviction, with affection, and also when you acquiesce or when again you're carried off to engaging in activities driven by kama, then also repent, or then also be aware of when that's happening. Try not to identify and foster affinity for those samskaras that are driving that, and when it happens, repent for it. And if one can go through it, doing that inner work of trying to lean away from it, if you will, or allow that past conditioning of the psyche to continue to wash over oneself, so to speak, without it getting further exacerbated or without further intensifying it, but rather in such a way that it lightens, then it will, gradually be purified, and it won't be further nourished when you don't act on it and when you don't try to further deepen it. So when it happens, then to repent, in that awareness of it, to also repent when one acts upon it. Then Chakravarti Pad, he summarizes this whole topic in his commentary, and he says this phrase, nindami cha pibami cha, which is a little bit of a peculiar phrase, where he boils it down speaking in first person, saying, it's like literally, I decry and I drink.
What?
Meaning like I shouldn't drink this. Drinking this is bad, and I drink. I mean, not that he's saying it's good to drink, but it's like, at least when I'm drinking it, I'm saying it's not good to drink this. That's also something. It's also valuable. In other words, doing it with that awareness of its negative consequences, of it not being in congruence with one's ideals, that also can work to lessen the perpetuation of the samskar for the activity. And so to do the thing, in other words, but to also repent for doing it, in other words, which will come, in the consequence or along with doing it, then even though one did it, the ultimate effect of it is less thwarting from the path than doing it thinking, oh yeah, this is great, or doing it like, it doesn't matter, but rather, okay, I did it again, but I really shouldn't have done it again, and how can I, attentively try to maintain my composure such that I'm less and less carried away by the tendency for that. That inner cultivation, so to speak, arguably is even more important than the practices of bhakti that we do. In other words, you can chant however many lakhs of this or do however many lakhs of that, but if you don't manage this bit, and if you're doing a big extreme amount of something because you're running after some sense of being great or some status of being perceived as great in the eyes of others, then you might actually just be exacerbating some non-bhakti samskar in the name of doing all this bhakti, and somebody else who might not be putting up any kind of big numbers or being any kind of amazing guy, but who's actively, cautiously, carefully going about a practice of sadhana, doing this inner contemplation, this inner attention to the process of purification, that might actually be spiritually far more advantageous and grounded and successful of an approach. So in that way, repentance is very much an integral part to, self-acceptance and, management of the challenges that one has. And there's two sides to it. It's problematic if it's lacking, and it can also be problematic if it's too extreme. In other words, if one becomes so repentant that, it can verge into depression or lack of motivation, or, it can go one way to an extreme, or hopelessness, or one can, lack also the self-care that is required. If one repents to the point of saying, I don't even deserve to be whatever because I'm so bad, then that also won't work. So it has to be calibrated in a way where it's successively reducing the behavior and the unfavorable thought patterns, but not so much so that it's also crippling other important, valuable thought, cultivation that also should be done internally, because, one has to have also, in popular speech, what they call self-love or self-compassion and, patience to have faults and to know that they don't disappear in one day. And if you, repent so extremely for them that you neglect to also give yourself the necessary care and time and support needed to gradually work through these things, then that also doesn't lead to success. So it's an important element among a number of elements in your toolkit, so to speak, to try to manage the unfavorable samskaras that we might find ourselves saddled with. And if we're lucky and we have the privilege and the time and, the care to try to do the work, so to speak, then we can gradually feel some lightening, if you will, of those unfavorable elements and the purification that can come from a healthy form of repentance.
So I think this is a path of awareness, sincere awareness of one's state of consciousness and heart, and positive action. Awareness,
absolutely.
Positive action. Yeah, definitely.
So like this poem that we just read today, where he's saying, my mind might go down a good road, my mind might go down a bad road, let it go, it's my karma. In other words, we can also see that from a modern perspective as also like a certain amount of self-acceptance or of even self-care, that he knows his mind is not going to be perfectly the way he wants it to be all the time or immediately get to that stage. So he's patient. He's accepting that the mind will stray and it'll also come back, and, whatever I have to go through, okay. And he's sort of a soft strength or a soft assertion towards dealing with, what Arjuna calls something harder to control than the wind. So it's a valuable thing. In other words, as I mentioned, there's all these prayers, let my mind constantly think of you. And, then someone might feel, well, I'm just so incapable of that, so this is the other side of the coin is, okay, sometimes I'm going to get distracted. Okay, let the distraction go and let the mind come back too. I heard one point of advice someone gave that someone was saying, oh, my mind, it's I forget, God so many times every day. I just struggle so much to remember him. And then the person hearing the person seeking advice, they said, well, after all those times that you forgot him, at some point, however long later, you remembered him again, right? It's like, yeah. It's like, so for every time that you forgot, you also remembered. Like, yeah. So you could think badly about how many times you forgot, but you could also be grateful for how many times you remembered. Because from a broad perspective, we don't just remember Bhagavan, but we're actually reminded of him. It's actually all grace that we even have a sanskar for bhakti that can bring that thought to mind. So for as much bad as there is in my life, I can also see a flip side and see all of the good. And so, to keep a balance between those two sides and to have patience for the difficulties that come along, as well as a sense of earnestness to push through them, those two things together can create a healthy model or a healthy, mental environment, so to speak, to quote unquote do the work.
Right. So what I hear is that the positive engagement is the key, and my previous experiences were I heard a lot of negativities, self-judgment, living quite a restrictive lifestyle that actually it's not natural for conditioned soul, and feeling bad about it, as opposed to, like we're discussing now, having this positive outlook on, so what, I'm as I am, and I engage myself, whatever platform I am, whatever stand I am. So I just want to applaud and highlight that this is part of positivity, and a life coach would say the same thing. Life is positive. We're looking for positive solutions and positive outlook. Otherwise, why are we living even? Right? So bhakti is a part of life. It's not part of, I'm dying because I want to, looking up into the spiritual world, but actually I'm, dead. But yes, well, there's expression like that too, I know. But while in this world, I took back everything bring everything into the service, into engagement of bhakti, to whatever scope I have. Yeah. Sorry, try to.
No worries. Nice. Thank you for sharing, and we've gone a little extra long today, but I think it was nice, and it was relevant to our last topic, which is, as I said, this last verse is a little bit peculiar. So I think it's definitely worth some discussion, because actually I think some very important side of the coin that gets lesser emphasized is also found in this statement. So I'm glad we spent some extra time on it.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, well, I'll conclude here, and if we're so blessed, then next week we'll dive further into the Bhaktas' expressions of Niṣṭhā. Vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Thank you.